In this video, we are going to be continuing our epic Titan board journey by creating the remains of the legendary Deus Tempestus.
It's tabletop time.
I'm Dave.
I'm Jen.
And if you've been following this journey, you'll be excited to see we're up to the Deus Tempestus, the first of two Warlord Titans that are going to be part of this build. This build has only been made possible by Arc 40k and their awesome tournament down in Australia that's bringing not only us, but Squidmar, Victoria Minis, and more down to our hometown of Melbourne. And not only them, but also thanks to House of War, who have commissioned us to make this awesome board to be the top table and go on to live there.
So Arc 40k is on this weekend and tickets for general admission are still available. If you want to grab your tickets, all of the links are down in the description below.
All right, that's enough plugging. Let's get down to building.
We've got a lot to do.
Now, the Deus Tempestus died from a colossal reactor meltdown, a huge detonation that basically vaporized most of it. Now, that would create a lot of heat, and the armature wire I've used for some of the gubbins in the core of the Titan is made of aluminium. Aluminium has a very low melting temperature. I'm going to use some fire and try and get some cool effects by melting armature wire. Now, don't try this at home or whatever, and use protection.
I don't know if breathing in aluminium is bad.
Can't be good, right?
I can't tell if that's making fire or not.
It's hot. Oh my god.
No, it ain't doing what I thought it would do. It's lighting the resin on fire.
It's like melting all the glue too. Down like right at the bottom.
That's UV resin.
Oh.
It ain't melting, eh?
So plan A, kill it with fire, didn't work at all. Clearly not able to get hot enough to melt aluminium. So that means plan B. Now plan B is to use UV resin and drip it over the edges to make it look like the metal has gone molten and then just sagged and dried. I think it'll work pretty well, but it's going to be a bit more time consuming than the joy of fire.
Why doesn't the fire never work?
Fire never work. You want firework. Fireworks. It's time to work on the legendary Deus Tempestus. If you're not familiar with this Titan, I'm going to give you a bit of a lowdown later in the video, but for now, just know that what we're making is a Warlord Titan's legs that have basically detonated at the waist. In our previous video where we cut a Warlord Titan in half, there was a little bit of concern that we were kind of destroying a Titan. Well, don't worry, every part of the animal is going to get used, and this is the first of them. Now, to make a Warlord Titan look like it had exploded at its core, we needed to do a little bit of what is called greebling, known by industry veterans as basically the process of detailing out flat areas, especially on miniatures, to make them look like they are realistic or they could have functional purpose. For the Deus Tempestus, which we had hacked apart and blown up at the torso, meant adding a whole bunch of rubble, including structural spurs, springs, bars, all kinds of things that look like they held this thing together at some stage. Now, most of this I made from thick armature wire, the core of the design being these two large spring-like structures towards the back of the Titan. The function of things in greebling is often irrelevant. What matters is that it looks like it's part of a functional and fictional machine more so than actually giving it an engineering purpose. I mean, we all know that these colossal mechs wouldn't actually be able to hold up their own weight because physics is a bastard like that.
So we discussed a couple of different options when it came to adding some melting effects to the Titan. And we'd gone around with the idea of millipart and super glue, but I suggested using UV resin. This would be the quickest and more efficient way to add those little drips that we wanted.
This Titan has exploded from the waist up, a sort of a core detonation to prevent any kind of salvage being undertaken on it. This is almost heresy on its own, but was a worthy sacrifice. Now, this kind of detonation would cause a superheating of the metal, so the UV resin was used to drip down and make it look like the metal had heated to such a point that it had started to sag, melt, and droop after the explosion. I used UV resin to deliberately create these drips, curing the resin as it was coming out and as it was dripping. You can see it slowing down and forming these beautiful liquid drops, and when this is all painted silver, it's going to look great. Now, the waist at this stage, even with those struts, lacks a sense of drama, and thankfully, we deliberately left on some of the torso armor mounting points. So I grabbed these panels and got some pliers and very roughly hacked these up and damaged them. I wanted these to look like they've stayed part of the Titan, but definitely got torn apart to some degree when the explosion happened.
Not gonna lie, my heart broke a little bit seeing you absolutely hack these pieces apart, but I know you're gonna make them look awesome.
And the great thing is, the larger chunks that were cut off with the clippers, we can use to pepper the board and decorate it, as if the shards of this Titan flew out at high velocity and impacted the terrain around it.
Oh gosh.
And with more drippies around any damaged area, it's starting to come together. And with this back circular door, I'm also vibing like Star Wars: The Phantom Menace when they cut the doors open with their lightsabers.
Oh, totally. This is great.
Now to fill out the top of this Titan, before putting in some weathering pigments or maybe sand, I just chucked in a bunch of wire meshes and some plastic art, a whole bunch of things that could look like internal panels, cabling, or superstructure that's all just mangled in a mess down here. Once that was done, I mixed up some rocks and sawdust to just make a chunky rubble mix and then glued that inside.
At this part of the process, it can seem a little jarring, a little bit weird, but I know whenever Dave makes something, it always turns out cool once it's sprayed black.
Does it come in black?
Now to paint all of these armor panels, we follow the same process I did for the laser gun in one of the first videos. They all get undercoated black and then on top of that sprayed with a silver paint. This is effectively the foundational color for every single part of these Titans.
Oh baby, I know how you like it. Oh yeah, gonna see it dance. Yeah. I don't know what I'm doing.
Spray him like one of the French boys, girls. So tight.
Alright, I'm going home. Bye, Dave. See you later. Bye.
Time to make the crater for the Deus Tempestus. I have no idea how deep to make it, but I know I need it to be like kind of shallow. That doesn't feel that shallow. Too deep. We're gonna fix a lot of it with sculptor mold. That's gotta be the center.
A Warlord Titan blowing up is no small feat, so we did want to have the Deus Tempestus sort of sunk into the board a little bit and with a crater surrounding it.
Pass me the Deus Tempestus! I need to cut it in at a deeper angle. I'm just very concerned about play space. It can't be steep because then models just slide.
I got the hot wire cutter and pulled the wire out at an angle, creating this gentle slope in a circular pattern.
It's just been sat there for 10,000 years. We're under-exaggerating, and I think in reality it would probably be up to like halfway up his ankles, but...
That done, much like the gun before, we sprayed in our streaking grimes, focusing on a dark rust in patchy areas and then a full coverage in a medium rust, just to make sure it all looks nice and orange like the sands of Mars.
I don't know what it is about this effect, but I absolutely love it. The sort of modeledness to it, it really does look like rust.
Now you'll notice here that we are not only painting the superstructure in this way, but also all the armor panels. And that's because we're going to use chipping medium on the panels and paint over them. I like the idea of revealing this rusty metal underneath all of the paint that is worn away. And even though it is super mega Titan Legion Mechanicus standard paint that sort of resists weathering for 10,000 years, it's still not completely unblemished and has started to take some damage.
Honestly, I super adore how this is coming together. I think it looks awesome, and for a weathered piece of the battlefield, I'm really happy with it. But one thing I have noticed is Legio Tempestus have these really nice silver trims on all the armor panels, like this panel here. So given how good the weathered silver looks, I don't want to have to repaint that and then re-rust it. So I'm going to try and airbrush in the panels and be really careful to get a good effect. If I can't pull it off, I'll just have to paint the trim separately, but I'm going to try to avoid having to do multiple steps and repaint things, and we'll see how it goes. Time to color in, painting very carefully between the lines. It'll be a journey.
Now all this streaking grime was applied after a varnish, which allows us to pull it back with white spirits. And on these armor panels in particular, I always do a vertical downward stroke focusing towards the middle of the panel. This creates these gorgeous streaked lines down the armor that I think look fantastic and really make them look like they're natural weathered metal.
Yeah, this is 100% a technique I would use again.
With all of this rust effect applied, I could bring in that Vallejo chipping medium, cover all the panels liberally, and allow that to dry. Now this paint will allow the next coat of paint to be basically peeled off with some water and a sharp little scratchy stick, which is really cool for some of these effects. We tried them out on the gun, but this is the first real test where we can start to do some crazy things with these armor panels and then take away and really add a sense of age to this model.
Let's see if it works then.
Now for these armor panels, I chose to use the airbrush. I avoided the edges as much as I could and effectively coated in an imperial blue with a lighter blue on top, as well as a bone white with a white highlight for the bone sections. These two colors are the colors of the Legio Tempestus and will look really good when they're scratched away, I hope. And by using the airbrush, we get a really nice consistent coat across the whole area. It also doesn't overly wet it with brush strokes, which can affect the chipping medium underneath. We have limitations, and also the amount of of weathering we're doing on these means we don't need to paint each of these panels as if it was the showcase panel on someone's centerpiece Titan. However, I cannot simply have a Warlord Titan and go the lazy route. So I got some masking tape and decided to mask on some panels, cutting out small squares so I could do some checkerboard patterns, as well as thin centimeter high strips of masking so I could create some strips across the model as well.
Those peelies are so satisfying.
Wow, Jen, you've got pink hair and also a purple top.
Yeah, how awesome is it? This is some of the new merch that's available on our web store.
It's a much better provider. I'm super happy with them. The old logos aren't rubbing off in the wash. We've got a new provider on our web store that handles all of our merch, and not only that, we've added some new items such as aprons.
We also have our roleplay posters available to purchase, but they are limited edition.
Anything you grab from the merch store is a super big help to the channel, and we actually have a special promo this February only, which is today, is all that's left. 10% off everything on the store, including the digital models for Gatecrash. So if you've been looking to grab some of them, now is a really good time to get on board.
So what are you waiting for? Grab yourself some awesome merch and come support us. All the links are down in the description below. I think I'm gonna have to buy like a couple of these because we're gonna go through a lot of...
Yeah, we're gonna get messy. Speaking of getting messy, shall we go?
Yes.
I'm not a huge scratch building person, but when it came to making the shrine, I decided I wanted to grab a couple of kits and see what we could make up. We also had the Kill Team Chalneth box that had some really cool pieces in it, and a Rogue Trader box too.
So what are you actually building here?
So I'm building a shrine that's going to go at the base of the Titan.
A shrine?
Yeah.
Why?
We had this idea that perhaps people would like to come and visit the beautiful Titan that has been destroyed and worship it in all their weird and twisted ways.
Now, a spoiler alert for the end of the book Mechanicum here. A warning that some future spoilers will follow for the outcomes of some of the Titans in that book. So if you're super concerned, maybe skip ahead a little bit or put your fingers in your ears and go la la la. This book's been out for quite some time and is set in 30k, so it's ancient history for the worlds of 40k. The outcome for all these Titans and this battlefield, in fact, is it is all flooded in lava and buried. So even the board itself is actually a little bit of suspension of disbelief. It's a little bit of fan fiction here. According to the narrative, all of these Titans and all their wreckages were buried in liquid magma, but in our universe, perhaps they have been excavated by keen Mechanicum archaeologists looking into the history of the Schism of Mars.
At the end of the day, we're trying to build a really cool board with lots of story, and I think this really helps. As a site of worship, we wanted to add some candles. Well, not just some, a lot. We wanted to add a butt ton of candles to this shrine. And Mari actually had the suggestion of cutting up tubes of plasticard and using them as candles, and this is absolutely brilliant. I wish Mari had come up with this idea for my sisters, but it works fantastic here nevertheless.
It's a fairly time-consuming process cutting a whole bunch of little tubes up, but I do think the result is pretty satisfying. I noticed you also made some thicker candles out of milliput, which I think is a great idea to give a bit of differentiation to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Not all candles come in the same shape and size. And then to make them all more cohesive, I did the same thing that Dave did and added some UV resin to look like the melted candle wax and to just kind of bring it all together.
It's amazing how UV resin in small droplets with a UV light can be such a versatile hobby tool.
So it came time to start adding a little bit of detail to the armor panels. And I'd done this a couple of times before with some scripture work for my sisters, so I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. For some inspiration, I looked up the transfer sheet that these guys would use and copied a couple of the designs. Once I was happy with how the panels were looking, I also added in little blocks of text just to sort of surround the panels and make them look fuller.
So you're working on some really nice scripture work here, Jen.
I got a little bit scared. As you can probably see in the camera, a spider decided to visit me, a whitetail, in fact, so I stopped painting at this point.
Well, it wouldn't be Australia if there wasn't a random spider attack while you're trying to paint a miniature. Now, there was a panel I really wanted to tackle, and that was the knee that says the name of the Titan and has some cool lightning bolts. I also added some kill marks on it in white, as if the Moderati at some point had marked out the super heavy tanks and Xeno Titans that this bad boy has taken down in the past. I also added in red paint a little bit of a graffiti kill marking. Some overly loyal and misguided person at some point in history has come along and marked the deaths of 3 traitor Titans on the Deus Tempestus knee as well. With all those panels done, it was time to pull back some paint using some water and a sharp pick, and this is a super satisfying section. So we're going to show you lots of juicy footage while I do as promised and tell you a little bit about the Deus Tempestus, one of my favorite Titans in all of Warhammer 30k.
So one of the really exciting things that we're doing in this board is we're getting to bring parts of the lore of 40k and Horus Heresy to the tables and hopefully to people's ears for the first time. If you haven't read the book or listened to the audiobook Mechanicum, I strongly recommend it. It is a fantastic read and covers a side of the Horus Heresy that isn't covered very heavily in other books. Featured prominently in this is the Legio Tempestus and the Legio Mortis, two bitter enemies with rival territory on the surface of Mars. The Deus Tempestus, the Titan that we're working on in this video, is a very interesting Titan indeed. It was potentially one of the first Warlord Titans ever constructed. It is on the record as being the oldest Titan in the Legio Tempestus, and the Legio Tempestus themselves on the record as being one of the oldest Titan legions, which means this very well could be one of the first Titans. The Deus Tempestus was a warlord armed with what we believe was a macro Gatling blaster and a volcano cannon, as well as apocalypse missile launchers. And it sat dormant for 200 years, not even moving a single servo or hydraulic, and yet, testament to its construction, it could still be reactivated when needed. This kind of lore really allows for the idea of a Titan corpse to withstand the erosion of Mars's surface for 10,000 years, because these things really are built to last. Now, spoilers to follow for the next minute while I work on this Titan. The Deus Tempestus was, until the Princeps Signoris, the leader of the entire Legio Tempestus, was interred in an amniotic tank, being directly interred into the Deus Tempestus in a customized cockpit. Princeps Cavallerio's amniotic tank is installed into the cockpit of the Deus Tempestus, and he pilots it with a direct neurological feed link. He's basically one with the Titan, kind of like an Ava pilot. Now, the Deus Tempestus manages some amazing feats of combat in their last stand against Legio Mortis, and as the rest of his Legio is wiped out, the Deus Tempestus and Princeps Cavallerio is one of the last Titans still standing. He manages to fell 2 Warlord Titans and a Reaver before going down, but unfortunately for Princeps Cavallerio, victory could not be had, as his Titan is crippled by the Aquila Ignis, an Imperator-class Titan Legio Mortis is fielding. With boarding charges being placed on the legs of his Titan, the Magos on board and Cavallerio make the ultimate sacrifice and sacrilege, deciding to detonate the reactor aboard the Titan rather than have it captured by Legio Mortis. With the dust of this explosion settling, and the only surviving Titan being the Imperator-class Aquila Ignis, Coriel Zeth's Magma City is detonated, and the whole battlefield is flooded with lava. In our board, we're taking on almost an alternate history version of that, or maybe one where the Mechanicum in the 41st millennium has finally excavated away some of that rock. The reality of the battlefield and its place in the 41st millennium is obviously sketchy, as most fan creations for Warhammer are, but I really wanted to make a big homage to one of my favorite books and one of my favorite Titan battles of all time. We're planning on cramming a lot of action into a very small space, with very specific Titan kills on the board as well. We really hope you enjoyed the journey and you like what we've done, and hopefully here this venerable Titan can be honored in House of War forever.
With all these steps coming together and panels drying, it was time to lower the Deus Tempestus into the board. We'd cut out his little space for his feetsies, and now we could squish him in. So we used Sculptamold, as we often do, hacking underneath his feet and then squashing the Tempestus down. Using a thin layer of Sculptamold, we then built up all of the edges. This not only adds a bit of texture and base color to the board, but it protects and seals the foam, allowing us to use aerosols, as well as all kinds of other glue products and things later in the build. To accentuate the fact that this is a crater, we also used a broken rim of the crater, a little lip where you could see the edge of it raised up, almost like some cover, but this really did help to sell the effect of it being the remains of an explosion. We did break this down and leave it open in areas to make sure there was plenty of space for large tracked vehicles to move around though. Another final consideration that's worth noting. Now, we've already seen some comments in chat about sort of getting realistic vibes with how the laser trench went down, which apparently isn't a laser, but you know, I'm not going to deal with that right now. And we wanted to just sort of get across that something really important with building a gaming board is you do have to make concessions to reality. For example, I believe the explosion surrounding the Deus Tempestus and the size of the crater would actually be massive. It would be so much more colossal than this and so much more damaging than this. But the nature of it being a gaming board means that the slope can't be so steep that models will slide or slip down it. It really needs to just be a gentle slope that is a very usable usable gaming surface. So we're always making these little concessions while we're building this table so that it can be both narrative and exciting to look at, but also a really fun playable board that you're not trying to balance models everywhere on just to use. The very first thing I did before proceeding was I got the airbrush out and just sprayed in some dark charcoals and blacks. I didn't use too much as I could always use some weathering pigments later, but I just wanted to deepen and darken some rings around the Titan to accentuate that crater even more.
On top of this, we added different textures and colors of sand just to build up the board a little bit more.
Now, of course, in reality, it's been 10,000 years, so sand would have probably completely covered and filled this crater by now, especially with this depth. But we're not worrying about that. We're trying to tell a story.
The rule of cool, right?
The rule of cool. Once this was done, the final thing to do was to place in the shrine that had been built, allowing its focal point to be the knee of the Deus Tempestus that says Deus Tempestus. It makes sense that this is the site of worship. With this placed, this part of the board was done for now, and we can take a look at our Titan. You know, maybe after a nice snazzy montage of us gluing on those armor panels. We'd like to thank all of our lovely patrons who support us to make these videos. It's been fun sharing our progress in the Titan chat in our mini club Discord, and we really couldn't do it without your support. We've been putting in some big hours smashing out this project on a pretty tight turnaround, and it's been an amazing privilege to be able to share it with you all. So thank you once again to our patrons for your support. If you'd like to consider joining our Patreon, the links are in the description, and we'd love to have you along. We want to continue to tackle ambitious and exciting projects like this, and it really is only because of you that we can.
Titans!
Yay!
That's awesome.
Mari basically hasn't been in this video.
I haven't. I missed all this. No, I saw you working on it. It's been crazy.
Mari's been hard at work on another video doing a Chord Reaver Titan. How's that going?
I'm in the process of painting. In fact, here's a little piece I'm working on right now.
So that video is going to be out next Friday, so get ready for that one because I think it's going to be pretty spicy.
Like and subscribe!
Please.
Yeah.
Titans!
Reaver!